Well. It looks like Anita Sarkeesian's Ida B. Wells episode is doing pretty poorly in the ratings. This series hasn't been doing nearly as well as the Tropes vs. Women in Video Game series, obviously, but this episode is doing so much more poorly than the others. In fact, it's so unpopular that the Ada Lovelace episode, which has been released during my work on this video, has a lot more views, even though it came out 16 days after the Ida B. Wells episode did. Even the video description of the Ada Lovelace video is asking people to go and watch the Ida B. Wells video. They're not saying, hey, click here to watch the previous episode in the series. None of the other Ordinary Women episode descriptions link to the other episodes in this series. They all direct you to the Ida B. Wells episode. As a matter of fact, all of Anita's videos say this now. Even Anita's oldest video, still up on her channel from 2009, has been edited to say, please watch The Courageous Life of Ida B. Wells, #Ordinary Women. And this video only has 125,000 views, i.e. nobody watches it, but they're that desperate. I have never seen Feminist Frequency do something like this before. Why are they so hung up on getting more views for this video? I don't know, but I'd love to know why. The audio quality in this episode sounds just as bad, if not worse, than the audio from the Jingxi episode.
There's something irresistible about underdog stories where remarkable people rise from humble beginnings to do incredible things against all the odds.
Years before her critics dubbed her one of the most dangerous people in America, a young woman named Emma Goldman found herself at a dance.
But few stories are as dramatic as that of Ida B. Wells.
Which is weird because there are these odd spots in the episode where the audio quality seems great and then it drops back into this tin can quality.
Black men were often falsely accused of rape in order to justify their murders. But in a series of widely read articles and pamphlets, Wells argued that lynching had little to do with protecting the honor of women.
I guess they did multiple takes of this episode and her microphone was set in different places. Maybe the best performance Anita gave was when the microphone was too far away. Here's the budget breakdown for this episode. There's nothing to say about this that I haven't said before in my previous videos, but there is something a tad bit interesting that I hadn't noticed before in the behind the scenes footage for this series. The exact date when Anita Sarkeesian filmed this series has always been a bit of a mystery. We know this series was filmed in one day because Anita Sarkeesian refers to the day of the shoot.
Lisa, who's the producer who has done an amazing job, she pulled together this amazing crew for the day of the shoot.
But when that day actually took place has been unknown. You can see clapperboards here and there in this behind the scenes footage, but what's written on them is always kind of blurry. It's possible that they were using stickers with reflective surfaces and that's why it's tough to read them most of the time. However, in this shot you can read what's written as long as you watch it in full screen mode and in the highest definition. You can see the director, A. Sarkeesian, camera, J. Sides, and the date is 2/2/16. Wait, what? 2/2/16? That's February 2nd of this year. These were all filmed in one single day and that was February 2nd? Her campaign video didn't come out until March 10th. That means she waited 37 days to begin fundraising for a show she'd already finished filming over a month ago. Who waits over 5 weeks to fundraise a video series you'd already finished filming? What was she doing? She didn't release any videos in that time. She'd released her previous video 2 weeks before the filming even took place. What took her so long? I don't know, but it seems like what I said about a year ago holds true to this day. She is notoriously bad at getting her videos made on time, and it looks like we have yet another piece of evidence to that effect. Alright, let's move on to the content of the Ida B. Wells episode.
There's something irresistible about underdog stories where remarkable people rise from humble beginnings to do incredible things against all the odds. But few stories are as dramatic as that of Ida B. Wells.
Are you sure about that, Anita Sarkeesian? If you were going to say that about anybody, wouldn't you say that about Jingxi? You just released a video about Jingxi, the former prostitute who, according to you, transformed herself from a relatively powerless young woman into the most powerful female pirate in history.
When she finally died in 1884 at 60 years old, she had transformed herself from a relatively powerless young woman into both the most powerful female pirate in history.
I think Jingxi ranks a tad bit higher than Ida B. Wells on the scale of who is more inspirational.
But few stories are as dramatic as that of Ida B. Wells. A woman who was born a slave in Mississippi in the midst of the Civil War and became a daring investigative reporter and a civil rights crusader.
Yes, she was born a slave during the Civil War, so let's keep things in perspective here. Ida B. Wells did not live the life of a slave. How do I know? Because of the timeline of events. April 12, 1861, the Civil War begins. July 16, 1862, Ida B. Wells is born. Spring of 1865, Civil War ends. As you can see from this timeline, it's in April of 1865 that the Confederates began to surrender, so people tend to say the war ended in spring of 1865. But let's extend the length of the war up to July 7th when some Lincoln assassination conspirators were executed. The war is obviously done by then, but for the sake of the argument, let's say the Civil War ended in July 7th of 1865. That means Ida B. Wells was still less than 3 years old when it was over. She wasn't even 3.5 when the 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution. Yes, she was born a slave, but did she have to endure the immense pain and turmoil of the life of a slave? Of course not, but Anita is later going to say Ida transformed herself from a slave to a woman who walked like she owned the world, as if little baby Ida B. Wells deserved some credit for her own emancipation.
And transformed herself from a slave who was regarded as property to someone once described as a woman who walked as if she owned the world.
I suppose it would be more inconvenient to have to acknowledge that hundreds of thousands of white men had to die to make that happen.
From an early age, Wells carried exceptional burdens with exceptional courage. She became the head of her household at the age of 16 when both her parents died suddenly from yellow fever. In order to support her 5 brothers and sisters, she curtailed her education and started working as a school teacher in rural Mississippi.
Black women were allowed to become the heads of their own households, go to school, get jobs as school teachers, and at 16 years of age? Only 13 years after the Civil War ended? Wow, I'll remember that whenever someone tells me that back in times gone by, women weren't allowed control over their own lives.
When she was 21 years old, Wells boarded a train to Memphis and seated herself in the first-class ladies' car, only to be told that black women were restricted to second class. Not only did she bite the conductor who tried to remove her, she soon filed a discrimination lawsuit against the railroad company. She won the initial case, and while it was overturned on appeal, an article she wrote about the experience helped launch her career as a journalist.
Wait a second, let's not skip over the details of that case. We all know that Ida B. Wells is supposed to be amazing because she was a black woman who achieved great things, but as I covered back in April, she won that case because of white men. In fact, we're gonna play part of that video right now. As far as I can tell, this so-called defiant woman of history never had to fight against racist white people to get a job. She was never personally physically assaulted in her lifetime by white people, with the exception of her being forcibly removed from a train car reserved for white people only. The conductor did try to remove her by force, and when he did, she immediately bit him on the hand. In Ida's words, "He tried to drag me out of the seat. But the moment he caught hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth in the back of his hand." Later on page 19 of Crusade for Justice, she also says, "Strangely, I held on to my ticket all this time, and although the sleeves of my linen duster had been torn out and I had been pretty roughly handled, I had not been hurt physically." So even in this one incident of what we today might call assault, she wasn't hurt physically. So how was she so defiant? According to her, it was because of her lawsuit against that railroad. In her words, "It was the first case in which a colored plaintiff in the South had appealed to a state court since the repeal of the Civil Rights Bill by the United States Supreme Court." It seems as though it would be accurate to cast Ida B. Wells as a defiant woman of history, but again, she's not as amazing as Anita thinks. For one thing, Ida B. Wells herself said that the reason her case had attracted so much attention was not because she was a woman, but because she was black. This had purely to do with her race, not her gender. Also, this defiant black lady, in her attempts to win her lawsuit, only won with the assistance of white men after the initial betrayal of black men, or one particular black man to be accurate. She writes again in Crusade for Justice that, "I went back to Memphis and engaged a colored lawyer to bring suit against the railroad for me. After months of delay, I found he had been bought off by the road. And as he was the only colored lawyer in town, I had to get a white one." So even in her fighting against racism, it wasn't defiance against a purely racist white society. It was against evil people in general, including black people. But there's more. Who ruled over the case and ruled in her favor? According to Ida B. Wells, it was Judge Pierce, an ex-Union soldier. Yeah, that's right, a white man, a former soldier who fought against the Confederacy. You know, the Confederacy that wanted to protect the practice of owning slaves. slaves. He presided over her case and ruled in her favor. Oh, but it gets better. Remember that white lawyer she had to hire because her black lawyer betrayed her? She refers to him as Judge Greer in Crusade for Justice. More specifically, according to a note at the bottom of page 56 of the Memphis Diary of I.W. Wells, his full name was James M. Greer, also a former Union officer, just like the judge who ruled in her favor. If Anita and Laura weren't overinflating I.W. Wells' achievements, information like this wouldn't even be necessary. I don't think it's any accident that they glossed over the details of this case. It might be a tad bit embarrassing to admit that it was white men from the same Civil War that emancipated her in the first place that had to come to the rescue again and help her win her career-making case. Not to mention this was after she was betrayed by a black dude.
Black men were often falsely accused of rape in order to justify their murders. But in a series of widely read articles and pamphlets, Wells argued that lynching had little to do with protecting the honor of women and everything to do with protecting the power of Southern white men.
No argument in terms of historical fact here, but we're going to explore this a bit further. Yes, black men were falsely accused of rape. In my opinion, from what I have read from I.W. Wells, it was actually the white men who made that accusation more often than white women did. So why delve into this? Because Anita Sarkeesian is an advocate of the listen and believe women mentality.
So I leave you with one simple thought. One of the most radical things you can do is to actually believe women when they tell you about their experiences.
That's what they did back then. To be fair, because I don't want to mislead anybody, I.W. Wells wrote that nobody believed that black men raped white women. She said that white people knew that was a myth, and the false accusation was just a facade to excuse their mistreatment of black people after the war. However, white women knew they could bank on a false accusation of rape to protect their reputation. She documented an instance where a preacher's wife falsely cried rape and got her black lover sent to prison. And the newspaper source Ida referred to said that this woman's husband did in fact believe her when she claimed to have been raped. I won't go into further detail on this subject since I'm not disputing what Anita said about the false accusations of rape. I brought all this up because this is where such great injustice occurs, when people make spurious accusations against others. Racist white men made them to cover for their racist bloodlust. White women made them to protect their reputation. Anita Sarkeesian sees those false rape accusations as a problem because it led to the unjust punishment against black men, but she ought to have that same attitude towards men in general, because false accusations of rape are as old as the Bible.
The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them, wrote Wells.
I'd like to find the source of that quote. I know people attribute that quote to I.W. Wells, but I couldn't find it in I.W. Wells' writings myself, so if anyone can give me the source for this quote, let me know and I'll put the source in an annotation and a note in the description.
Although she had many suitors and withstood enormous social pressure to marry, Wells remained single throughout her 20s.
Why is she smiling? This came up in the first Ordinary Women episode with Emma Goldman. Oh, Emma Goldman protested the institution of marriage. Grin. This is so creepy. I don't understand what it is about this disdain for marriage that would make someone smile. It's not funny, it's not ironic, and it's not admirable. I don't get it. It's so weird and creepy. I get, okay, marriage in its current legal form is a joke. It's nothing like what the Bible prescribes. But even I don't find pleasure in knowing there are people out there who are avoiding marriage for that reason. That's a bad thing. It would never make me smile.
After one of her anti-lynching articles displeased the white community, an angry mob stormed the office of the paper and destroyed it. Faced with death threats, Wells started carrying a pistol in her purse, but refused to back down from her anti-lynching campaign. She said it was better to die fighting against injustice than to die like a dog or a rat in a trap.
Nope, she bought that pistol after her friend Thomas Moss was lynched 3 months before. She already had it by the time the free speech was destroyed. I mean, come on, Laura Hudson. This whole section you wrote is all in the same paragraph on the same page. Even the line about dying like a dog or a rat in a trap. How could you get this wrong? You even had Anita mention the lynchings that occurred 3 months prior and mention Thomas Moss by name.
Wells' life changed forever in 1892 when her friend Thomas Moss was murdered by a white mob in Memphis along with 2 other black men.
Here's some advice for your script writing. Get good.
Get good!
After that, she relocated to New York, where she began to publish investigative journalism for an even larger audience, including pamphlets that collected statistical documentation of lynching in the South.
She was already in New York. She went to New York on vacation right before her newspaper was destroyed. I know Anita said soon after she relocated to New York, not that she hadn't been there already, so technically she's not wrong, she's just saying that she made the decision to stay in New York indefinitely. Okay, that kinda makes sense, granted, but there's another problem. She moved to Chicago, Illinois in June of 1895, less than 3.5 years later. Why is that a problem? Because they put an image of a book she wrote in Chicago on the screen while talking about her writings in New York. It even says 128 Clark Street, Chicago under Ida's name. This section of the episode is just so messy on the details. You wouldn't know she moved to Chicago just by watching this episode. You'd think she relocated to New York, but for some unknown reason, published a pamphlet hundreds of miles away in a completely different state.
When she passed away in 1931 at the age of 69,
No, she didn't die at 69 like Jingxi. She came close, but not quite. She was 68 when she died. Maybe Laura Hudson was rounding her age and that's why 69, but as funny as that might be, she died at 68 years of age, not 69. But strap yourselves in, dear viewers, because that's nothing compared to what we're about to see. You want to know why this video is so long? Get ready to find out.
investigative journalism for an even larger audience, including pamphlets that collected statistical documentation of lynching.
Behold, the Illuminati numbers that led me down a dark path of investigation that left me dumbfounded, confused, befuddled, and ultimately outraged. You think these numbers are benign? Think again. You won't find them anywhere in the book they just put on screen. The numbers you see in the Ida B. Wells video is from a table of Lynch Statistics that I found in the massive tome Encyclopedia of Death and the Human Experience. These statistics are unofficial. They come from Tuskegee University, and their site says they were submitted in 2010 by an unknown author. That by itself doesn't necessarily make them inaccurate, but assuming they're true, using them the way Feminist Frequency did is misleading in numerous ways. These numbers are collected from 1882 to 1968. That's not only 87 years of lynchings combined for each state. That includes 37 years of lynchings that happened after Ida B. Wells died. In fact, since the Red Record was published in 1895, these numbers include 73 more years worth of lynch crimes than had actually been committed when Ida published her book. Ida would never have written that there were 204 lynchings committed in Tennessee. Ida says that in 1892 there were 28 lynchings in Tennessee, and in 1893 there were 10. But wait, those are just individual years, right? Maybe if you tally up all the lynchings ever committed in Tennessee, you'll get 204. The problem is Ida simply didn't write that. This episode puts that number on the screen while Anita tells us how Ida wrote pamphlets with statistical documentations of lynchings in the South,
including pamphlets that collected statistical documentation of lynching in the South.
She never says or gives any indication that this 204 number is some giant cumulative number combined from decades and decades worth of data that didn't even exist at the time. In fact, when they put the title of A Red Record on the screen, you can tell it's a scan of some old cover of the pamphlet, which, if you just Google it, you'll find that they cut out certain things from the cover, like, oh, I don't know, the part of the title that says outright that its statistics are for 1892 through 1894, i.e., they inflated Ida's statistical data by an extra 2,800%. I guess it wasn't enough to just quote what Ida wrote. They could have, but they didn't. 204 just sounds so much more tragic than saying, 10 black guys got lynched in Tennessee in 1893. You can bet that if 204 had occurred in 1 year in just one state, Ida B. Wells would be all over it. That would be more than the annual total she wrote for all the lynchings of all the states combined in 1893. But no, Anita Sarkeesian / Laura Hudson, or heck, maybe even Noodle House, had to pick this huge number from a list that, if true, means that on average, less than 3 black men were lynched per year in the state of Tennessee. Less than 3 per year for almost a century. But as long as you don't question where they're getting their numbers from, you'll never know that if you just watch their episode. Oh, but we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. These numbers they put on the screen are only of black men who got lynched. 204 for Tennessee is only counting the black victims. There were 47 white men in this table who also got lynched in Tennessee. Same thing with Mississippi. 539 black men lynched and 42 white men as well. Georgia, 492 blacks, 39 whites. Granted, there's an obvious pattern of black people being lynched far more often than white men, but there's some curious little things in this list as well. For example, 7 of these states has 0 lynchings of black men, and each of them has anywhere from 1 to 31 lynchings of white men. There's only one state where 0 white men were lynched, but only 1 man was lynched there, so only 1 black man got lynched in Delaware over an 87-year period, according to this list. In 16 states where both whites and blacks were lynched, more white men were victims than blacks. We even have 2 states where just as many white guys were lynched as blacks, though to be fair, they each only had 2 lynchings altogether. But here's where the funny part comes in. This list says no black guys were lynched in Arizona or Idaho. Not for 87 years. Ida B. Wells wrote that in just 1 year, 1892, 3 black men were lynched in Arizona and 8 were lynched in Idaho. Wah wah. Who is right? They both can't be right, and that's just in regards to 2 states. There's 5 states whose data conflicts with Ida B. Wells's book. Unbelievable. But hey, who cares about all that? We'll just use these numbers anyway. Who cares if they contradict the defiant, extraordinary woman of history we supposedly admire so much? I had no idea just how far this rabbit hole went when I saw these numbers. Heck, at this point, you're all probably thinking, enough already with the numbers. We've seen all there is to see here. Ha! You fools! After discovering all that we've covered thus far, I turned my sights on Ida B. Wells herself. Did she get her own statistical information right? I mean, Anita called Ida brilliant and extraordinary.
Although each of them is extraordinary, and not just because these women were brilliant.
And she has the benefit of being a teacher before she became a journalist.
Education and started working as a school teacher in rural Mississippi.
She says Ida's future mentor called his own work feeble in comparison to hers.
And even her future mentor, Frederick Douglass, called his writing on the subject feeble in comparison.
So her statistical data must have been perfect, or near perfect, right? No, she was bad. Oh, she was so bad at this. You have no idea. Ida wrote that she got her data from the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and also says the lynching data she got for the years of 1892 and 1893 came from the January 1st edition for 1894. But I found that newspaper. I've looked over every page. It has no lynching statistics in it. Turns out it was actually the January 1st edition of 1893 for the data on 1892, and December 31st of 1893 for the data for 1893. Technically, Ida didn't cite a specific edition for her 1892 data, but the only source she had cited previously was January 1st of 1894, leaving the reader, i.e. me, to think that if I found that newspaper, it would hold this information. Well, I guess I was wrong, but whose fault is that? Ida B. Wells. Despite all of that, I did find the right newspapers, but it took me forever to do so. It doesn't help that this same newspaper is archived separately as the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Daily Tribune, so that made it even more difficult. However, I did finally find scans of the correct papers and compared their statistical data to what Ida B. Wells wrote in A Red Record. Here's what I found. Ida B. Wells incorrectly cited a lot of her lynching statistics. We'll start with 1892. The Tribune said that in 1892 there were 236 victims in total, which is a correct total of all the lynchings they listed per state. Ida wrote that there were 241 persons lynched. She not only got the total number wrong from the paper, but her total number doesn't even add up from the number of lynchings she assigned to each state. She says 241, but adding her state's lynchings altogether comes up to 239. Not not 241. But wait, 3 paragraphs later, Ida describes a brother, a sister, and their father being lynched. Maybe she cited one lynching that involved killing all 3 of them, so even if Ida's total doesn't match the newspaper, she's still being consistent with her own numbers. Wrong again. Those 2 children are distinctly listed and counted in the paragraph right before that one. That paragraph lists the various allegations brought against the Negro victims and gives a specific number for how many of them died for each one. Those tally up to 160. The number she says in the paragraph before that is the total number of Negroes out of the total 241 persons she says were lynched. So that doesn't explain Ida's incorrect total. As it turns out, several of the numbers of lynchings she gives per state also don't match the numbers listed in the Tribune. Out of 26 states, she got 6 of them wrong. As you can see, sometimes she had a higher number than the newspaper said, and sometimes she lowballed it. This tells me Ida wasn't trying to overinflate the numbers so much as it tells me that she needed some serious editorial oversight. She got the totals wrong, she got the numbers per state wrong, and couldn't even get the right total number by adding her own wrong numbers together. This point will become even more clear when we look at her lynching statistics for 1893. She only got 2 of them right. I've been thinking I must have got her source wrong for her numbers. How could she get so many numbers wrong? Surely I must have made a mistake in my research. But the only newspaper she cites in a red record for her lynching statistics is the Chicago Tribune. Again, she said it was January 1st of 1894, but the only issue I could find that gives the statistics for the lynchings in 1893 is the one that came out the day before, December 31st of that year. Here's what I found. I discovered that Ida B. Wells wrote down the statistics for only 15 of the 27 states the Tribune listed. Why? Why would she do that? I don't know. Out of the 15 she did cite, only 2 of them actually matched the numbers in the Tribune. Oh, and you know what else? Her one lynching for the state of New York? That's not even in the paper for 1893. Look at the clipping for yourself. Where's New York? It's not even there, but Ida includes it in the list. Again, I point this out not to argue that Ida was trying to artificially inflate the numbers. The point is, she sucked at citing her statistics, and she's supposed to be brilliant.
These women were brilliant.
I considered going into her 1894 stats, but there's nothing to say about them that hasn't been said already. She made all the same mistakes, except for one. This time, she did cite the correct edition of the Tribune. Good for her, but dang if that's not the most minute praise I could give. Oh, she got 1 out of 3. What brilliant female journalist only gets 1 out of 3 of her citations right? What brilliant former teacher journalist fails at basic math and leaves out huge chunks of data that would help her make her point stronger? When I first began to create this video, I never suspected any of this. My running presumption was that Ida B. Wells' writings didn't require scrutiny because what she talked about was probably true and error-free. My primary target has been Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson and their claims about Ida B. Wells, not Ida B. Wells herself. I had to stop myself at one point because I think I've only seen the tip of the iceberg of how many times Ida B. Wells screwed up. Heck, I bet I missed a thing or two in the Ida B. Wells episode, but at this point, I don't even care to find more. I couldn't even find a proper place in the script to point out that when she talked about a black man who was lynched after falsely being accused of rape, Ida cited a different newspaper and got the date wrong again. She cited the October 1st, 1892 edition when it was the September 24th edition, and I have more data I could comb through. The Red Record still has so much information I haven't begun to scrutinize. I bought her 400-page autobiography because I intended to read the entire thing. Not anymore. I would probably kill myself trying to work through it all. We do have a couple things worth mentioning from the little I did read. There's another date. It's on page 18. I won't even expound on it. I'll just give you the page here. She got another date wrong. The other thing comes from page Roman numeral 30, which says, so in 1928, she began to write her autobiography. Painstakingly, she wrote, rewrote, revised, and corrected the manuscript. The first third she wrote by hand. She dictated the rest, carefully proofreading and revising. So what's wrong with this? I mean, aside from the obvious, brilliant former teacher journalist getting a date wrong, we've already been over that. But how about getting her own age wrong? In her own autobiography, when she's talking about when her parents died. Yep, she did that. There's even a footnote on page 15 that's like, yeah, she wasn't 14 when her parents died, she was 16. We have a letter from the Census Bureau, and there's a diary entry from her birthday in 1887 where she says she's 25, which would mean she would have to be 16 when this happened. Lord God Almighty, what was wrong with Ida B. Wells? And more importantly, why does nobody talk about this anywhere on the internet? Am I the only person who discovered this?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
I cannot believe this. I couldn't make this up. It's so stupid. It's so freaking stupid. What other things did Ida B. Wells write that I don't even know about? If she could get the most basic information about herself wrong in a book she's writing about herself, painstakingly rewriting and revising and correcting after having been both a school teacher and an internationally acclaimed journalist, then as far as I'm concerned, everything is up for grabs. I wouldn't take her at her word if she said the sky was blue. And now we come back to Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson. You probably forgot about them. These smiling, grinning con artists sitting in their rooms talking about how excited they are to teach people about their ordinary women. It's all such a bullcrap lie. I never had to smile and dress myself up so I could lie to the camera about my intentions for making my video. I was never excited to teach people about Ida B. Wells, but consider how deep we've delved into her work. Consider how much bigger your brain feels, dear viewers, in that you have knowledge about this woman that few people will ever have. This is the education you can't get even with $200,000.
You dropped 150 grand on education you could have got for $1.50 in late charges at the public library.
This is the research that is utterly foreign to the woman who makes her living proclaiming the quality of her own analysis.
As you might imagine, this project requires an enormous amount of research.
My analysis is very well researched. It's double and triple checked. It has to be, given the intense level of scrutiny focused on my every word.
That last statement especially has new meaning for me now. It's a very telling statement about Anita's unfamiliarity with what it means to do proper research. Double and triple checked? That's for amateurs. Triple checking is for noobs. Try checking and rechecking about a dozen times over, and maybe you're onto something. Heck, if Anita had bothered to check those Lynch crime numbers and remove them from the video, I would never have known the outrageous mistakes Ida B. Wells made. If only she had done what she says she does, odds are nobody would ever have known. But we know now, thanks to her screw-up. Good job, Anita Sarkeesian. Good job, Laura Hudson. We're all a lot more smart, and you both look even more dumb than you did before, and we couldn't have done it without you. In closing, I want to do what Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson would never do. I invite fan and critic alike to scrutinize my video. Like I said, I keep thinking maybe I've missed some obvious bit of information that might explain away the apparent incompetence of Ida B. Wells. I've already had my brothers go over the old newspapers and Ida B. Wells' book and compared what's written there to what I put on the screen. I'm aware of my own fallibility. Heck, I made a mistake about Ida B. Wells in my Facts of History video back in April. I said the Civil War ended in 1863 and therefore Ida was less than a year old when the Civil War ended. I thought I double-checked that, but clearly I hadn't. So I made a mistake. It was just the one mistake. It didn't refute the point I was making, but it keeps me aware of my own fallibility, and given the nature of my claims, I know I need more eyes on this video than my own. So I've put links to all the newspapers I quoted in this video in the description so you can check them yourself. Ida's book is available for free anywhere on the web. Even the Kindle version is free to buy from Amazon. I'll include a link to that too so that you can get the same version I showed in the video. I'm also opening the video description for this video for anybody who sends me a legitimate mistake in what I've presented here, even if it's small, like, oh, you put a 5 in one of your numbers when you should have put 6. Good catch. I want that sent to me. If it checks out, I'll add it to the description. I'll even leave a blank screen right here for any annotations and links I might add later on. So if you're watching this and you're on a mobile device or a game console, I invite you to watch this video on a PC or a laptop so you can check the annotations and see if there are any new developments. That's how much I care about the truth. Even at this point, I'm still wondering, did I completely miss something in Ida B. Wells' writings that would explain away all these apparent problems? There must be something I missed that would explain why this has never been a controversy. I cannot be the only one in 121 years to have discovered this. I mean, I think I am, but I am holding the door of opportunity open to any naysayers who wish to prove me wrong. That concludes my rebuttal to Ordinary Women episode 4. I hope you guys loved watching this video as much as I loved making it. Like, subscribe, and as always, I cannot wait to see you again on the Prince Asbel channel.